For those that are attending in person, good morning for those online, but also that could mean good afternoon and good very early morning as well. Also for those in the future that are listening to this, welcome to the GCCA Pavilion, the Concrete Future Pavilion. We're delighted to host what is going to be an excellent discussion on ramping up industrial decarbonisation through CCS deployment. Just on behalf of the GCCA, the Global Cement and Concrete Association, we obviously want to thank all our sponsors for making the pavilion possible, which obviously includes the Global CCS Institute and the Clean Air Task Force, whose this event is. There's a great energy from COP already. The GCCA, little plug, we just launched our own action and progress report talking about all the decarbonisation work our members are doing against the commitments that we've made. Tons of examples in there, and of course, and policy asks to the policy-making community. But CCS is a critical lever for our own industry. So I'm particularly pleased that they've decided to host this really interesting event here today. So you haven't tuned in to hear from me. What I want to do, without further ado, really, is introduce Sam Bowers, who will moderate. He is from the Carbon Capture Clean Air Task Force. Sam, over to you to run through the event.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you to the GCCA for hosting us at this pavilion, and to our partners at the Global CCS Institutes. Everyone here at COP knows that CCS is a key part of decarbonizing industry globally, not just in the US, Europe, and Middle East, and Asia, but it's going to be critical all over the world. Industrial emissions represent about 20% of total global emissions. And this panel is going to discuss what role CCS has to play in eliminating those emissions. What are the prerequisites for large-scale industrial CCS projects? How can policies help bridge the shortfall between the cost of actually doing CCS and current policies? And we can also touch on what are the implications of geopolitics and tariffs on industrial decarbonization. So it's my pleasure to introduce this panel. We have Dr. Vanessa Chan, the Chief Commercialization Officer from the US Department of Energy, and also the Director of the Office of Technology Transitions. She is an innovator who has worked across a wide range of ecosystems, from academia to Fortune 1000 companies and startups. In this role, she is responsible for driving private sector uptake of clean energy technologies, and she leads the 17 national laboratories across the United States, so an incredibly important portfolio. And she's also been nominated for the Times 100 Leaders in Climate list. Next to Dr. Chan, we have Pavan Chilukuri, the VP and Group Head of CCUS at Holcim, one of the world's largest cement companies. And Holcim have put carbon capture kind of at the forefront of their decarbonization strategy, so we're looking forward to hearing from him. Before Holcim, Pavan was the Director of Decarbonization at Shell, working in hydrogen, carbon capture, and biofuel. And he's a member of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development at the Yale School of Management. Next to Pavan is my colleague, Lee Beck, who is the Senior Director for Europe at Clean Air Task Force. Before that, Lee led the carbon management program at CATF, responsible for delivering analysis and policy advocacy in Europe, the US, and the Middle East. She's an expert in carbon management, and now her portfolio includes other technologies like nuclear technology. And finally, we have Xiaoliang Yang from the GCCSI. He is the country manager for China. He is an expert in deployment of CCS in China. Before that, he worked at WRI. And we're really looking forward to hearing about all the work that China is doing, because we don't often kind of hear about that, at least in the West, which is where I live. So without further ado, we will have a 40-minute discussion, and then we will leave plenty of time for Q&A. So my first question is to Dr. Chan. The DOE has recently released its carbon management strategy. What role is there for CCS in decarbonizing U.S. industry?
Well, first of all, I'm really excited to be here. People had said no one's going to be at COP29, and I don't know about you guys, but I got 14,000 steps in, and based on my agenda, I don't know where those folks got that information, but I think the people who really care about the clean energy transition are here, and those who are not, were like, you know what, you guys are like the sunny weather football fans, right? So anyway, thank you guys for being here. Here at the Department of Energy, we really are very focused on CCS because a point source capture is really important if we're going to be able to decarbonize the really hard to decarbonize sectors. And currently, it's the only viable option is to have carbon capture for some of the heaviest emitting industries, such as cement and petrochemicals. Other sectors, such as pulp and paper and glass manufacturing, have relatively smaller process emissions, but also have limited ready-to-deploy alternatives to carbon capture and storage to reach our net zero emissions today. And so we really need to be able to deploy these technologies at scale if we're going to stay on track with our industrial decarbonization targets, since the alternative technology options really are not there today.
Thank you. The DOE has published several commercial liftoff reports, including on cement and chemicals. What is DOE doing to support industrial decarbonization efforts with CCS and more broadly?
Yeah, so first of all, if you guys have not gone to our Pathways to Commercial Liftoff, please go look at those. It's the reason why I'm on the Time 100 list. These are basically the commercialization roadmaps, which are the basis of the industrial strategy and policy for the U.S. for the clean energy transition. And you can find them at liftoff.energy.gov. That's liftoff.energy.gov. And we have a dozen reports that we have released, including one on carbon management. We just released SAF yesterday. And the reason why these are super important is they are catalyzing the ecosystem. So all of us know what we have to do in order to have these technologies be commercially viable. In the case of CCUS, what we're trying to do is get the equities that we got from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act out the door so that we can start to deploy these technologies. And the clean energy transition under the Biden-Harris administration, what we were really focused on was having a private sector-led but government-enabled energy transition. And we had $500 billion coming from Bill and IRA. And the question we had was, how do we take that money to buy down the risk to the point where the private sector, who has $23 trillion, can take over? So in the case of carbon management, in the 2021 DOE budget, we had a budget between $300 and $500 million annually. With the passage of a bill that year, we got an additional $12 billion allocated over the 5 years between 2022 and 2026. So relatively an 8-fold increase, which is pretty astounding. So the funding included $3.5 billion for regional direct air capture hubs, $3.5 billion for commercial carbon capture, demonstration, and large-scale pilot projects, which included $2.5 billion for 6 large commercial-scale carbon capture demonstration and $1 billion for large-scale pilot projects. There's $2 billion for financing CO2 transport infrastructure and a credit subsidy of $20 billion. $100 million for front-end engineering and design program for CO2 transport infrastructure, and $2.5 billion for the development of regional geologic storage sites. And in the $8 billion Clean Hydrogen Hubs program, there's a substantial commitment to clean hydrogen production from natural gas and biomass. So that is pretty amazing numbers out there. And in addition, there are several FECM programs, fossil energy and carbon management programs, that are relevant to the region's support of industrial decarbonization. So we have a carbon utilization procurement, carbon up grants, which support carbon conversion or the transformation of captured carbon emissions into useful products by making $100 million available to states, local governments, and utilities to purchase such programs. There also is the industrial decarbonization funding, which is $6 billion, from sister offices in the Department of Energy to go towards industrial decarbonization. And last but not least, there's the Carbon Safe, there's so many acronyms out there, which is the Carbon Storage Assurance Faculty Enterprise Program, which is conceived and implemented a decade ago to address knowledge gaps associated with commercial scale CO2 storage complexes. And it's now being invested with the private sector in the development, permitting, and construction of 20 to 40 geologic storage sites, each of which must store at least 50 million metric tons of carbon dioxide over 30 years. So we have a lot going on, which is really exciting.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive overview. It's clear that DOE is doing, incredible amounts of work to support carbon management, and it's not just the Biden-Harris administration, but previous administrations have also included significant, billions of dollars for CCS. So this is, a durable technology, durable to kind of political change, and has received support for, well over a decade in the United States. So turning now to Europe, Lee Beck, can you just give us a bit of an overview about what progress has been made in the deployment of CCS in Europe?
Yeah, thanks, Sam, for having me here. I'm really honored to be on this global panel, but also here in the pavilion. And I just want to agree with Vanessa. Everyone said this is going to be a small COP, and it's pretty full. And it's really exciting, actually, how much activities there is going on advanced energy tech around carbon capture and nuclear. So I think that is really fantastic. And of course, I'm always happy to be on a CCS panel because this is the technology of my heart. And so on Europe, look, I think Clean Air Task Force, we were started in the United States 25 years ago, focusing on emissions reductions from power plants. And we only started CCS work in Europe about 4 years ago. And at that point in time, we couldn't really talk about carbon capture in Brussels, let alone Germany, which is where I'm from. And so we've really seen a sea change. So what happened is that there were so many commercial projects, and I'm sure we're going to hear about this happening, but what was really going on is that the private sector caught policymakers napping on this topic. And so EU policymakers have been really, really busy over the past 4 years on catching up. So I think 2024 was really the most exciting year because we had finally the launch of a EU carbon management or industrial decarbonization strategy on the EU level, which really clarifies the different pieces of carbon management policies between the EU level and the member states. We had rapid proliferation of carbon management strategies on the member state level. I know that Germany is working really, really hard to overturn their CO2 storage law by the end of this year. Austria is on board. So there's in addition to all the other countries. So I think this is all really, really positive on the policy front. We've seen 11 large-scale facilities supported through the EU Innovation Fund. But I think what I find personally really, really exciting is the final investment decisions and the projects that are coming online. That is the Norwegian carbon capture facility in Northern Lights, Heidelberg Cement, as well as the CO2 import terminals ready to receive CO2, but also the Porthos project that received FID finally after a delay. And what I'm actually personally really excited about is we recently convened 11 governments for kind of an off-the-record discussion, how they're approaching and how they're helping projects to get to FID, because that's really what keeps us up at night, right? We have the policy frameworks, but we need to get steel in the ground to show that it can be done, that it can be done on time, on budget, and with the support of local communities. And the governments are realizing that, one-off policies aren't really enough because these projects are large-scale infrastructure projects, right? Unique capabilities, and I'd love to hear from you, within manufacturing companies aren't necessarily geologic CO2 storage or CO2 pipelines, right? And so I think the governments are really showing flexibility of specific project risk allocation on how they can potentially, for example, in the case of Porthos, the Dutch government took on the long lead equipment risk for this project as it was going through permitting challenges, right? So I think governments are really intervening to figure out what's the best way to share risk. So this is my favorite story, but of course there's much more happening. When I was in the UK the other day, I asked my Uber driver to turn up the radio because the new prime minister was talking about CCUS, and he dropped it 5 times within 15 minutes. And so I think what we're hoping to see now is really that we're not just making the best of the policies and the funding that has been dispersed, but really working project-specific with the stakeholders to get CCS projects to final investment decisions. So I'll stop here because I know we have a lot more to talk about.
No, that's great. And it's really exciting to see kind of other regions step up and provide the investment and policy support that is needed to scale CCS. So now we'll turn to Xiaoliang from GCCSI. Could you just give us an overview of what the current state is of CCS in China? Because it can be difficult for people to kind of have a window into all the progress that's being made there.
Sure. And thank you. Thank you for having me at your pavilion, also on your panel. My name is Xiaoliang. I'm from Global CCS Institute. And actually, there are lots of CCS activities in China happening right now, particularly in heavy industry. So I'm going to give you some quick examples so you understand the sector application, scale, and the status. So in the steels, in the cement sector, China is now operating at least 3 integrated, I think CCU more precise, carbon capture and utilization project. 2 projects are at a scale of 100,000 tons per year with amine-based approach, and 1 project is at a scale of 200,000 per year with oxy-fuel combustion technology. And this is actually the world's largest operational oxy-fuel combustion project in the cement sector. And 2 out of the 3 projects actually commenced operation just this year. And in the steel sector, Baogang Steel is in the Mongolia-based SOE is completing its China's very first 500,000 ton per year CCUS project at one of its steel plants in Mongolia, and they capture CO2 from its lime kiln, and now this construction is on the way to be completed. And actually, the 500,000 tons per year is just the phase 1 target. The final target is 2 million tons per year. And the 2 other SOEs, Baowu Steel and HBIS Hebei Steel, they both are the world's largest steel producers. They are also operating or demonstrating DRI with CCS. And that is for steel sector. For chemical, petrochemical, co-chemical, that's actually easier because there are some high concentration of CO2 from the flue gas. So there are several projects under construction and operational. So for instance, China National Energy just finished the construction of 500,000 tons per year CCUS project at one of its coal-to-chemical facilities in Ningxia province. And the 500,000 tons per year is also the phase 1 target. They have 3 phases. The final target is 4 million tons per year. So you can say the SOEs in the heavy industries are really demonstrating, trying to understand the CCUS in their field.
Thank you for that very comprehensive overview. It's clear China is doing a lot on the capture side, but most of the CO2 is being utilized rather than stored. So can you just touch on why has there been so much progress on the capture side, and what still needs to be done in terms of CO2 storage?
Sure. I think so. That's a very good question. I think I can answer in a simple way or in a more depth way. But I think simply speaking, because there is no economical incentive for storage in China, so CO2 utilization is the only way the company can get something back. Yeah, but at the same time, China is trying to understand the CO2 geological storage. The 3 oil and gas major producers in China are doing the CCS for EOR and the CCS for geologic storage. And in the long term, I think CO2 storage will be the primary driving force for CCUS in China.
Thank you. And we'll come to that later in the discussion. So we've heard 3 comprehensive overviews of what the US, Europe, and China are doing to support CCUS for industrial decarbonization, not just in cement, but across a range of sectors. Now we'll hear from Pavan, so someone who is actually building these projects on both, not just kind of in Europe. So can you tell us a bit about what progress Holcim has made with CCS?
Thank you for the opportunity to be sitting next between US, Europe, and China. And I'll explain why. I have major projects in Europe, to some extent only limited projects in US, and not many projects in China. So before coming to that, I think everyone understands that CCS is the only major lever for cement sector to decarbonize. There's no other way. And it is also hard to abate. And coming back to your point of why it is expensive, a ton of cement, depending on type, it can be anywhere between 500 to a ton of 500 kgs to a ton of CO2. And in the global south, the cement price is $40 to $50. And if you take the math into consideration and then total capture, transport, and storage, if it's 100 or 150, then the cement price has to be more than doubled in the global south, right? So when he says there's no business case, exactly the same reason. Like a company in Asia cannot single-handedly develop a CCS and sell a product at 2 or 3 times more when the competitor is not selling equally the cement at that price, or if there is no market. And that is exactly why we have Holcim. We have around 30 or 40 projects in different phases. 17 of them are flagship projects. 14 of them are in Europe, 3 of them in Americas. Out of that, 2 are in Canada. So the reason being the incentives, there's a carbon policy and the carbon price. Coming back to our European projects, we've been lucky to have received 7 CCUS projects so far, and most of them are CCS, and part of them, 2 projects are CCU, but they have different scales. The project in Poland is 1 million ton of capture facility. It's completed its feed. It's for storage, and we have broken ground on 2 new cement plants in Germany and in Belgium, where we hopefully capture 1.1 to 1.2 million tons of CO2. One is for storage, one is for utilization. We have 2 projects, one in Croatia, 0.4 million tons, which is going to the feed, and we have 1 project in Greece, 1 million ton. It's received innovation fund going to the feed. So we are gearing up towards FIDs in 25 and 26. The reason why we cannot go faster than that is, one, these are capital projects, but the most importantly is we need beyond the capture, right? You need to have capture, transport, and storage infrastructure. And the cement, what we can do is build a capture facility, which is already a step out of our natural comfort zone. But we need partners to build the transport and storage infrastructure, and that is where the governments have a role to play. They are playing the role, but what we are noticing is that we will be ready, but not the downstream infrastructure, and that is where we need support. Coming back to US, we are scoping several projects in US, but the business case is a bit challenging. So I'm happy to sit together with you to see how we can make the business cases more viable, more resilient and robust in US. But overall, at this moment, majority of the projects are in Europe and Northern Africa that has a policy support due to CBAM in Europe.
So we've heard that different regions have different strengths from a policy perspective. Maybe if we mesh them all together, we would have a perfect kind of industrial decarbonization strategy. But that's not kind of the world we live in. Pavan, can you just touch a little more specifically, as a developer, what specific policies or incentives do you think are most critical? Is it demand side? Is it supply side, or regulatory? What would make you act? What would help you get to projects, get to FID faster?
If it's a multiple choice, I need multiple answers as well. I need all of them. Yeah. So the cement is already very hard to decarbonize from the business case as well. So at the first most for us to be taking a investment decision, we need the business cases to be resilient and robust, because the infrastructure doesn't exist and the policy is unclear. For example, in Europe, yes, the main lever for decarbonizing is avoiding ETS, but there is no certainty on what the ETS price is going to be between now and 2035 and 2040 when you're basing your business cases on. And if I am relying just on ETS price, then my business case will not be robust, and it will be difficult to scale it up for more than 2 or 3 projects because investors would start questioning the robustness of the business case. So that means that you need multiple sources of revenue to make the business cases as robust as possible. In Europe, we do have CapEx support. We do have OpEx support from the EU Innovation Fund. We have ETS, as I've said, and we already have a market for low carbon cement. We have a product called EcoPact and EcoCycle, EcoPact and Eco brand products, which are 30% less CO2. And then we do see that there's a market for low carbon products that are willing to pay a price premium. So that's also an important revenue stream to make the business cases viable and resilient and robust. And I think the fourth revenue stream that is specific to cement is maximizing the biogenic CO2 and then generating CDRs and monetizing the CDRs into the voluntary market and helping those revenues to support the business cases robust and resilient. So that is in Europe. The work needs to be done is how can we stabilize the ETS price. And from that sense, I'm really happy with US because you have a stable $85 45Q credit. So that means that at least there's investment certainty. But the challenge becomes is $85 is too low for the cement sector. It only works if you are on a CO2 storage within 10 or 20 kilometers farther. And if you are anywhere farther from that, capture, transport, and storage is going to be well below that $85. And that is the reason why the cement sector is a little bit behind in scaling up the CCS in US. Yes, there is DOE funding, which is really beneficial, but I think the demand, having additional revenue sources, either through demand aggregation, demand generation, or carbon contract for difference, or industry-specific 45Q that takes into consideration industry-specific considerations needs to be done, because $85 would not be enough for all the cement plants to consider CCS in the most of the jurisdictions. So China, again, as we said, CCU is an amazing revenue source, but the problem is companies like ourselves, we have a scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 target. And if I were to move from scope 1 to scope 3 by taking my CO2 and producing e-fuels, I'm just moving the one box to other, and I will not be able to meet my net zero. I think that is a challenge with CCU. We may be able to do that for the next maybe 10 or 15 years, but any company who has a net zero for 2050, we cannot bank on CCU as a major lever because we will not be able to meet our net zero targets. That's a challenge. But for us, CCU, for us, the CCU in Europe, it works because we can monetize our biogenic CO2 either through CDRs storage or using a biogenic CO2 to produce e-methanol and e-SAF. That way, there's no scope 1 to scope 3 impact. So it is still compliant to our net zero pledge.
Thank you for kind of very practically explaining, how different policy mechanisms and approaches lead to kind of different decarbonization outcomes in the cement sector. Dr. Chan, I want to return to you. So you mentioned the Carbon Safe program and kind of all the investments the DOE has made in investing in developing storage sites across the country. The US, along with the US mostly, but also Canada and Norway, have been the leaders in geologic storage science, and it's very important that all that knowledge that the DOE has developed, is shared with international partners. So, could you just touch on what the US government and DOE specifically is doing? How it approaches international collaboration for decarbonization technologies like CCS?
Sure, happy to. And this must be your favorite panel. It's like you're here with 3 Santa Clauses, and you're like, this is what I need. So it's great to hear from you. So look, international engagement is so critical, which is why events like COP29 are really, really important. And what we do is we really have these multilateral and bilateral partnerships, and we do a lot of funding to make sure that U.S. scientists, where they really are at the cutting edge, are able to field projects worldwide. And so that's a lot of what we're also thinking about, is how do we bring our scientific prowess to the world. And so bilaterally, FECM collaborates with more than 30 countries to support U.S. interests in carbon management, to developing environments in emerging markets, exchange information and best practices, and to leverage the domestic investments that we've got in the U.S. and to share that knowledge elsewhere. And of course, this is just part of an interagency approach. We have other sister agencies, such as Departments of State and Commerce, who also have an opportunity to engage with other countries on the roles and the exchange of information that we can have, which is why forums like this are so critical.
I think, okay, we're back. Thank you. Xiaoliang, I want you to kind of pick up on that. What do you think the rest, other countries that are looking to deploy CCS can learn from how Chinese companies have approached CCS deployments? What lessons do you think can be learned?
So I think, before I answer that, I would like to explore a little bit on the main drivers behind this momentum in China. So what are the key drivers for Chinese companies deploying CCUS? I think broadly there are three main drivers. The first one is the political commitments. So after the top leadership made China's commitment to reach carbon neutrality before 2060 in September 2020, the SOEs are just hurrying, getting into this field to demonstrating their serious about the national commitment. That's the first one. The second one is to understand the technology at an integrated industry scale. China had been doing CCS in the past 20 years, but all at the pilot scale, small scale. But now they are trying to get into real engineering scale. So, and the third one is they are trying to be the market leader. So you can say the technology providers, project developers, and service providers in China are all getting into this market. But my conclusion is at this point, all this momentum is built on without an economic incentive. So I think in this space, China needs to learn from some other countries, from the USA, from the Europe in terms of 45Q, in terms of how to integrate ETS with CCUS. On the other hand, I think China's speed and scale can really drive down the global CCS cost. And if you go to China now, if you go to visit the project, you can see the gigantic facility for a 500,000 ton per annum project. And China can do that just within a 2-year or 3-year time frame. I think this kind of capacity to mobilize resources and execute a large-scale industry facility, and China is kind of unique. So I think international collaboration or knowledge sharing between China and the rest of the world can also be beneficial for China and for the global community.
I totally agree, and I'm sure everybody else in the room does, that more collaboration is key. It's also important to recognize kind of the world is the world as it is, and we may be moving to a place where competition trumps. Poor choice of words there, but where competition is considered more of a priority than collaboration in some areas. So Lee, I guess a general question for you: what do you think are the opportunities and pitfalls from border adjustments and tariffs as it relates to industrial decarbonization? Not necessarily looking for a specific region here, but just kind of your reflections on that.
Yeah, thank you so much for this really big question. I think actually from what we've seen over the past couple of years in the climate space is that we're actually building country coalitions around specific solutions, right? And carbon management is one of those. And today at 6 p.m., I think, is the Carbon Management Challenge Ministerial. Tomorrow there's more discussions around this topic where a set of over 24 countries came together to really accelerate this and collaborate, right? I think so. There is collaboration. And at Climate Week, we had a wonderful discussion with Assistant Secretary Crabtree at another event who had gone to China and looked at the facilities. And I think that is really, really positive. And that has to continue because I think there is a lot to learn. And as you said, Sam, right, when we had this discussion, a lot of people came up to us afterwards and were like, whoa, we didn't even know this was happening in China, right? So I think going into CBAM, I think what I heard from you just earlier was you said that because of CBAM, there is a lot of activity in Europe, right? And I think this is a good example how visionary policies like a CBAM, right? This is the first of a kind policy, or EU ETS, the first biggest carbon market, can drive and set kind of the pathway for decarbonization, in addition with project and technology specific incentives. So I think that is the importance of signals is important. That being said, I think at the Clean Air Task Force, one question that we continue to ask ourselves is, like, what is the tension between driving down costs of technology, as you said, and learning globally versus industrial policy and trying to do everything within your own borders. And I think that tension is coming to really to the forefront now, because we continue to have to ask the question, do we want to have nationally manufactured decarbonization solutions, or do we want to have the lowest cost solutions for our consumers, right? And in terms of CCS, I think that question still has to be asked. I think the supply chains are local, but also global from that perspective. So I think but then the most important part here is cost, right? How can we make these projects deliver at cost? And I think supply chains and raw materials increase in costs has really driven also the per ton capture cost. Some analyses have shown the $85, which we thought was a really good price, now is actually eradicated by 25% because of these new international circumstances of high interest rate, high inflation, and supply chain shortages. So I think what we would say to governments now are two things, right, to reduce costs. Number one is we've had the first generation of climate policies. Like, we're trying things out. Companies like yours are going out, they're trying to spec these projects, they're building these projects, and they're learning, right? And so what we'd like to see from policymakers is be open to the learning and be open to adjusting the policies based on these learnings, be it a different set of incentives or additional incentives for pieces of the value chain, like CO2 transport and storage, or a new 45Q value. That's the one piece. The other piece is engage in infrastructure planning, right? If you just kind of have these ad hoc projects, then we can't really reap the benefits of efficient infrastructure. So if, for example, for Europe, right, most of the CO2 storage is being developed in the North Sea by the UK, where actually EU CO2 can't really go right now because of regulatory issues, but also in Norway, for example. But there's not enough local CO2 storage onshore, and also in, you mentioned Greece, right, as an example, in Southern Europe. So that's one example. If we have efficiently planned CO2 infrastructure, it can actually reduce costs 5 to 6 times, right? So I think this is a big question, and I kind of try to go back to the ultimate issue, and that is we need to have the least cost energy transition.
That was a really great response, and I appreciate you tackling a difficult question. We've got about 3 questions left, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for a discussion. But just to respond to one thing you said, Lee, what we've seen, CATF does analysis and tracks projects around the world, and in the United States, what we've seen is 1,000% increase in applications for Class 6 wells, which is where U.S. companies can store CO2 storage. So, even though we've discussed, the policy landscape isn't perfect anywhere, and it never is, there is companies are taking this very seriously, and as we've discussed, storage and transport can be huge bottlenecks. So tackling that piece is absolutely key. Lee, I just want to go back to you for one more question. If I give you a magic wand, what kind of policies do you think Europe needs to scale CCS? What do you wish policymakers knew and would think about?
Yeah, I think this is also a big question. I think we have a first set of policies, as I said, right? Now working with the, close to 100 CCS facilities that are in planning in Europe to understand their challenges and adjust policies based on that. We have NZER Industry Act, which has streamlining of permitting, one-stop shops, all of this. So making it easier for companies to build things, maybe self-activating policies, right? You have to go out, you have to fill out hundreds of pages of documents, and then maybe one day you'll know if you get money. In the US, we all can come up with a project right now and know whether it qualifies for 45Q. So I think there is some kind of ease of application, as well as I said, CO2 transport and storage planning, and then individual incentives, and working then on the project-specific level, because you have all these different pieces of the puzzle that have to fall into place for a project to come together. Infrastructure, captured, they have different timelines, different permitting timelines, different permitting places, cross-border infrastructure. So how can governments be a backstop and kind of help you align some of these issues? For example, as I said, the Dutch are helping with long lead equipment orders, right, and taking the risk on for this. So I think there is some more project-specific risk sharing that governments can do, that overall this kind of gamble can actually play out well for them overall. And then I think in general in Europe, we want to see focus on Central and Eastern and Southern Europe to really accelerate transition there on advanced energy tech. So I'll stop here.
That's great. No, thank you. Pavan, I'm going to turn to you, and then we'll turn to Dr. Jan for kind of final remarks. So I'll ask you an easy question, because I've been asking tough questions. What's Holcim's long-term vision for CCS? What's still needed? What do you want to see? What do you wish? Well, that's a lot of questions. But what do you wish policymakers would know? And how do you plan?
I hope it's not one, but Aladdin, 3 wishes.
Yeah. Sure, you can have 3 wishes.
That's good. I'll ask for 3 wishes. Of course, first and foremost for us is infrastructure. There needs to be private capital and government capital flowing into the infrastructure development and innovation development, and we really appreciate the de-risking of technology that is being happening in China, because that flows back into Europe. But I think that is where the governments needs to step in and then invest in either innovation capital or infrastructure capital, because the companies like ourselves, we will not be able to cost effectively invest in transportation and storage network. That is absolutely the key first wish. The second wish is the demand side generation, right? So US, the secondary revenue stream could be the demand for zero carbon cement or zero carbon steel. At this moment, there's only certain states that are asking for it, but I understand national policy may be difficult, but of course, how do we incentivize the demand side generation in same as Europe as well, right? So there are country policies coming in, but then I think we need more signals on the specific targets on zero carbon cement and zero carbon concrete and steel, so that you have the demand side revenue streams to make the business cases robust and resilient. And the third one is industry specific funding, right? So cement industry pays a lot of ETS, and this year we received only 3 innovation fund to the cement sector. So, and European cement sector, there are 250 cement production sites in Europe. So if EU is going to be only funding 3 every year, how will we decarbonize the 250 production sites when the industry as a whole is paying such a lot of ETS for the allowances into the pockets? So how do we direct the money from what industry is paying back to industry to decarbonize? These are the 3 wishes, but maybe I haven't counted much, so I'm going to ask for one more. As I said, I think I'll stick with 3.
Okay, great. Yeah. So final question, then we'll turn to the audience. Dr. Chan, looking ahead, what do you see as the biggest opportunities and potential roadblocks for achieving large-scale CCS deployment in the US on cement, but also other industries?
Well, first of all, I think Pavan has done a really good job with his holiday wish list. And
I've been a good boy this year.
yeah. So there's no coal coming for you?
Not this year.
Not this year. Look, I think the challenges have actually been really well laid out by this panel, and I do think one of the challenges is that like all 12 of my liftoff technologies are all different. I love them equally, like I love equally all my children. But I will say the carbon management one's the trickiest one because the problem is very multidimensional, right? Unlike others like hydronuclear where you're selling something and you've got this is a much more multidimensional, right, one that we need to be thinking about because there's trade, there's other things that you have to think about. Cement is heavy and so forth. And so I think that what we've been trying to do here is take a very practical approach in the U.S., which is why I think 45Q has been great because it's very practical and easy to apply. And I think certainty is something that the private sector likes because they don't like uncertainty. So when they know that even something may not be as high as they want it, at least they know what the number is and they can plan around it. So I think that's a big practicality. Secondly, I totally agree with this need for thinking about local and how do you end up making sure you can get things that are co-located as close as possible. And that's the reason why the Carbon Safe program has been so important is we are looking to expand to 20 to 40 additional geologic storage hubs because hubs, I think, are the best way to go because with hubs, you actually get to synergies, get to scale because in the end, it's all about economies of scale and how do you bring the cost curve down. And then on the infrastructure side, I mentioned, we have $2.1 billion for the Carbon Dioxide Transportation Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Authority, or CIFIA. This is why I have to have a thing. There's too many acronyms. And that's going to help jumpstart financing of CO2 transport infrastructure, because for those that are not near hubs, like how do we get the CO2 there cost effectively? And through this, we're looking for low interest loans and grants, which will hopefully help to knit together the future projects. And I think the CDR is really important in terms of a revenue stream. And so another thing that I think was very innovative was we created a CDR prize, which was $32 million. And as I mentioned earlier, we really focused on a private sector-led, government-enabled energy transition. And what got me really excited about $32 million was Google saw, like, we're going to do the same thing. And that's what you want to do is inspire people when you fulfill someone's Christmas list, that they are matching the Christmas list with other things as well. And in addition, here at DOE, we're very focused on the ecosystem. That is why the pathways to commercial liftoff at liftoff.energy.gov are so important because it's getting everyone on the same page of what we have to do. And as part of this, we also have a carbon transport research development and demonstration consortium that we're creating, which is going to be a consortium that is going to be led by experts from our 17 national labs, industry, research universities, labor unions, NGOs, and other organizations who are really going to coordinate on CO2 transportation. Because in the end, anything that we want to do the clean energy transition requires a massive ecosystem coordination. And if we don't have that coordination, it makes it really, really challenging. So I'm excited that at least the factory is open to start making some of the lists of your wish happen, but we still have a long way to go. But I really am feeling very hopeful that we are starting where we need to get to.
Thank you so much. And yes, in the spirit of cooperation between private sector, government, but also internationally, I think it's a great place to land. So we'll now turn to the audience. We've got about 7 minutes. I know Pavan has to hop in 2 minutes, but here, I will take this, and we can pass the mic around if anyone wants to ask any of this panelists a question. Don't be shy. Yeah.
Pavan, I actually have a question for you on book and claim in particular. It's been really widely discussed here at COP, but it's also kind of controversial. But I know, if we cement is a locally consumed product. So what's your perspective on that?
I'm still thinking on what my position is on that book and claim. It has a benefit, right? So all of a sudden it gives you market access to wider region to market your zero carbon cement. So that means that the first movers have an advantage to market their product over the longer geographies without having to physically move. But the moment you have multiple producers competing into the same market, that also reduces such revenue streams for the first movers as well, especially first movers who have taken significant amount of risk. And the position with regards to whether book and claim is going to be between the Europe jurisdiction, or will we have a book and claim outside of Europe as well. So it has its positives, it has its negatives. So I think we are still evaluating what's the best way forward on that one. I think now I remember my fourth wish, which is the CDR.
Don't get greedy.
No, CDR on mixed fuel sources, because at this moment most of the CDR is a pure biogenic CO2, but the cement we have a mixed fuel. So how do we ensure that mixed fuel is also recognized? And in the global south, how do we ensure that part, not a full-scale plant, but the part-scale capture facility on a mixed fuel? And how do we prioritize biogenic CO2 so that you use the biogenic CO2 source revenues to kickstart the decarbonization and subsidize the fossil-related decarbonization. So,
Great. Does anybody have a question for the panelists? If not, we will. Okay. Yeah.
Hi everyone. It's
Please just state your name and
It's
organisation.
Nicola Knight from Morley Consulting. And actually my question really was for Holcim. You've been really successful with the innovation funds. We can see the number of awards you've had over the last few years, which is great. But how do you manage with that competition and sharing that knowledge, the knowledge that you've learned through the projects that you've executed over the last few years? How do you share that information more widely with other cement producers, other regions within your own organisation?
there are several forums for knowledge transfer, right? I think EU CNEA is giving us a platform to share the learnings across other industries that have received funding, and between industries as well. That is one platform where we do it. And the second one is through industry associations with GCCA and Global CCS Institute as well. And the third one is, of course, providing the knowledge to the value chain partners in the technology or in transport and then storage, and at times also collaborating with our other cement players in unlocking transport and storage infrastructure so that collectively we can take the benefit of it. For example, in France, we are working with our competitors in unlocking the transport and storage infrastructure. So that is how we transfer the knowledge. I think that knowledge, most of the ones, is how do you execute and how do you ensure that you unlock the entire value chain. So the capture side, I don't think there's not much learnings, but it's most on the project execution and then unlocking the value chain, capture, transport, and storage together. How do we align FIDs?
Excellent, thank you. That's really good to hear.
Hello. I come from the steel industry, and we considered those projects several times, and one of the biggest barriers was not only the investment but the operational cost, right? Especially transportation, especially if you build the hubs, which could be further located from a particular site. So how do you see the role of the regulator or the government in those operational costs, or do you see, if any? That question could be answered by anyone, I mean, not the business or the regulator.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious also what, Vanessa, you say about how some of these projects are financed, and because you have indeed a large CapEx investment and then a per ton operational costs, and you need to make sure you can actually recoup some of the CapEx investment with per ton incentives, right? And I think overall what we've seen is that actually a lot of these projects are either balance sheet or government funded, right? So there's not necessarily the private capital business model that we'd like to see, and that's what keeps us up at night. Because how do we actually make this, turn this into from these kind of one-off large-scale projects into, we have it everywhere, and it actually, you can make it work in that sense. I think ETS price stable, right, at a high enough cost would help with that as one example. There's other, there's like asset base or kind of revenue model. There's contracts for differences that governments have put in place, like the Netherlands and the UK, or the per ton 45Q. But again, you're financing CapEx and you have the OpEx over time, right? So I think, and then for the steel industry, it's also different than from the cement industry. Right, so I think that's where I would stop. I don't know if you have anything to add, or Vanessa, you want to talk about it?
Yeah, so since you're up at night because of financing keeping you up, I should call you. It's keeping me up at night too. And I think, one of the challenges we have right now is that everyone is first in line to be 8th or 9th. No one is first in line to be first, second. In the Squid Games situation right now. And so what I think we need to figure out is how do we finance and collectively spread the risk, because I think we need a completely new way of thinking about risk and finance. The challenge we have right now for all the different technologies for the clean energy transition, not just carbon management technologies, is that none of these things are yet at scale. And what's happening is we're using a way of thinking about financing to apply to things not yet at scale. So we have the same hurdle rates, we have the same NPVs, the same IRRs that were expectations, but we're not there yet because these are not economically viable. So until we're in a situation where the private sector is willing to look at these in a different way, and because I've been in a lot of capital allocation discussions with clients in my former days, and you're always benchmarking the returns of different projects, and it doesn't make sense because some are short term and these are longer term, and we have to get to that tipping point, and we have to get the infrastructure built out. So I think the only way to do this is through collaboration and to jointly take a risk. And so I almost think like a giant Kickstarter campaign across the world is what we need to do, where everyone puts a little bit in, we're all going to take a hit, but if we collectively do that, then I think we can get to the point where we need to get to.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I would direct you to Asa from the World Steel Association if you have questions about that. But we are at time, so I just want to say a big thank you to our panelists, Dr. Vanessa Chan, Pavan, Xiaolang, and Lee. Thank you very much.